But yeah, you've done a good job in that Google Doc, and you now have access to it. And I will post my slides a bit later today, so you can just click on the link at any point and come back to this, or just save the doc for yourselves in the meantime if you would like to. I do encourage you to keep it open in a tab, because we might come back to it during this part of the session. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Vladimir Prop, who came up with a structure for fairy tales, or basically wrote down what he saw as a structure in fairy tales. So his now famous study, The Morphology of the Folk Tale, outlined 31 basic functions that constitute the formation of a paradigmatic wonder tale. Okay, so it's from quite a long time ago, 1928. By functions, Prop meant the fundamental and constant components of a tale that are the acts of a character and necessary for driving the action forward. So this is a fairly wordy definition. I think it becomes clearer towards the end, but I do think this video explains it very nicely. So we're going to watch this video together, and then if we have time, see if you can apply Prop's morphology to your selected story. So just give me a moment to share my screen with you, and we will watch that together.
We discussed several aspects of structuralism in the previous lectures, especially its thesis that a thing's identity is defined by its place in a structure. In this lecture, we will look at the work of Vladimir Prop, a literary scholar who is often seen as an example of a structuralist, even though he came up with his ideas independently of the Saussure. His analysis of the Russian fairy tale is a beautiful example, first, of what structuralist research in the humanities looks like, and second, of the thesis that a thing's identity is defined by its place in a structure. So, without further ado, Vladimir Prop. Vladimir Prop took a big corpus of Russian fairy tales and started to analyze them. Now, obviously, one way to do that would be to think about the meaning or message of each of these stories individually. That might be the approach taken by a hermeneuticist. But Prop has a very different aim in mind. He isn't so much interested in the particular details of the stories. He wants to know about the structure that you can find in every story. Just like the grammarian doesn't want to interpret the meaning of a sentence, but wants to dissect it into a subject, an object, a verb, and other parts, and then wants to tell us the rules of how such parts can be combined into sentences. In the same way, Prop wants to dissect fairy tales into their components and wants to tell us how they can be combined. He wants to understand the structure of the fairy tale. The assumption that underlies Prop's whole project is that fairy tales have a fairly determinate structure, that beneath their differences, there is something that generally stays the same. Very early in the book, Prop gives us some examples of scenes from fairy tales that are different on the surface, but in fact play an identical role in the story. Namely, 1. A Tsar gives an eagle to a hero. The eagle carries the hero away to another kingdom. 2. An old man gives Suchenko a horse. The horse carries Suchenko away to another kingdom. 3. A sorcerer gives Ivan a little boat. The boat takes Ivan to another kingdom. 4. A princess gives Ivan a ring. Young men appearing from out of the ring carry Ivan away into another kingdom. In one sense, these scenes are clearly different. Different people are interacting with different objects. But there is also a sense in which these scenes are in fact the same. There are always two characters fulfilling the same roles. Let's call them the hero and the donor. The hero is on a quest, and the donor gives the hero an object that will bring him to where he needs to go. So we have the two same basic characters, hero and donor, and the two same basic story events, or what Prop calls functions, namely the reception of a magical thing and the guidance of the hero to where he needs to go. What Prop goes on to do is to systematically investigate all the roles and all the story functions that are to be found in Russian fairy tales. Let's look at the roles first. According to Prop, there are exactly 7 types of characters in these tales, of which the 3 most important are the hero, the princess, and the villain. Let's look at them a little more closely. So, what makes a character a hero? You might think that a hero needs to be strong, or smart, or wise, or maybe honorable, or courageous. And perhaps the hero is most of those things in most of those tales. But that's not really what turns him into a hero. What makes someone the hero of the story is that he struggles against the villain in order to rescue the princess. If there is no villain, and if Ivan just marries Veronica because they love each other, we don't have a fairy tale, and Ivan isn't a hero. On the other hand, if there's no princess, then there is no reason for Ivan to ever leave his uncle's farm or his father's palace, and again, we have no hero. So a character is a hero not because of any intrinsic properties, not because of any properties of his own, but because he plays a certain role in the whole structure formed by the hero, the villain, and the princess, and maybe by some of the other roles as well. So we can see here the basic idea of structuralism made, I think, very clear. Your identity as a hero depends not so much on yourself, but on your place in a larger structure. Of course, what is true for the hero is also true for the other roles. You can't be a fairy tale villain if there's no princess to abduct and no hero to defeat you. Just imagine the Aladdin movie without Aladdin. It would be the story of the evil Grand Vizier Jafar becoming, with no serious resistance, the absolute ruler of the world and forcing Princess Jasmine to marry him. That is not a fairy tale. It's, I don't know, a dark political horror or something, but not a fairy tale. In that story, Jafar certainly would be some kind of villain, but he would not have the role of a fairy tale villain. And so on. No role is defined by any intrinsic characteristics. The villain doesn't have to be evil. The princess doesn't have to be beautiful or even female. But they have to be part of the whole structure of the fairy tale roles. By understanding that structure, we understand the genre of fairy tales better. Now, let us move from the characters, from the roles, to the narrative functions, the general plot events, if you wish. Here, Prop distinguished 31 functions. We already saw 2 of them. The receipt of a magical agent, in which the hero acquires the use of a magical object because of his good actions. And guidance, in which the hero is transferred to a location that is vital for his quest. But now I want to look at 2 others, because they will help to illustrate that Prop doesn't just identify these 31 functions, but also gives us very clear rules for how they can be combined. The 2 functions I want to look at are interdiction and violation. Interdiction is a scene in which the hero is warned not to do something. For instance, before the hero approaches the Wood of Darkness, he is warned never to stray from the path, because that would spell disaster. Or the hero is given a magical boat, but he is warned never to fall asleep while he is in it. Something like that. Violation, on the other hand, is a scene in which the interdiction is violated. The hero does stray from the path, or he does fall asleep in the boat. So, what combinations of violation and interdiction are possible? Prop points out that first, if you have violation, you also must have interdiction. That's pretty obvious, right? You can't violate an interdiction if there is no interdiction to violate. Second, he points out that violation can only happen after interdiction, never before it. It never happens that the hero first falls asleep in the boat and is only warned about it afterwards. Third, and more surprisingly, Prop shows that not only does violation require interdiction, but interdiction also requires violation. You cannot have an interdiction that is not violated. Of course, you can have that in real life, but you can't have it in a fairy tale. It never happens that the hero is warned against straying from the path, and then he carefully never strays from the path. Of course not. That would be boring. Something will happen that makes him stray from the path. Maybe he hears cries for help, or his dog runs off into the woods and he needs to go after it. There is never an interdiction without a violation. That is simply one of the rules of the genre. Prop manages to find quite a lot of rules of the genre, which determine which combinations of functions are possible and which are not, and what order they can occur in. Just as linguists can tell us which combinations of words create a well-formed sentence, Prop can tell us which combinations of story functions create a well-formed fairy tale. So he has found not just the structure of the roles of the Russian fairy tale, but also the structure of the narrative of the Russian fairy tale. A Proppian structuralist analysis obviously works best for genres with rather rigid conventions. There should, for instance, be absolutely no problem in applying it to James Bond movies. We have the hero, we have the villain, we have the Bond girl, and so on. We have a scene in which Bond receives some weird technological toys, and then we know that for every toy, there must be a scene in which he uses it. If Bond receives a mobile phone that can explode, it will explode at some time later in the movie, and so on. On the other hand, we can imagine that such a structuralist analysis will be much harder to apply to, say, literary novels or avant-garde movies. Still, structuralism is an important and influential addition to the toolkit of many parts of the humanities, and its key insight that things often are what they are because of the role that they play in a bigger structure is an insight that can be applied in many, many fields.
Okay, thanks for watching. Fairly long, but I think it really explains that complicated two sentences on prop quite nicely and provides some examples. And it's nice listening to a guy who you know is passionate about what he's talking about, so quite entertaining as well. So there are questions that I'd like you to apply to your reading of your selected fairy tales. So I think I'm just going to read through these questions with you. We probably won't have time to actually apply these in class. But having learnt about prop study, what elements of prop can you identify in the prescribed fairy tales? and make note of where and how the tales may deviate from Prop's morphology and why. So do they align with his morphology? Do they go against it? Why? How do you know this? And how useful is Prop's morphology as a means of mapping what happens in the prescribed tales and why? So ask these questions of your selected fairy tales. You don't need to go through all of them right now. You know, it's up to you. I have pasted these questions into the Google Doc. They're questions 4 and 5. So at some point, maybe you can do this after today's session as homework. This is just for you, though. So obviously, I encourage you all to read all the required stories, so all 4 of them, not just the one that you read today. And maybe you can add to each other's summaries, use this as a study document or a study group document, answer these questions. I think that will be of assistance to you. Okay, so those are the questions I would like you to address at some point. If we have time, just now we'll come back to them. But to move ahead, there is additional reading on VC Learn. So if you go to this module and Learning Unit 3, Fairytales, that's where you'll find this online reading that I've referred to here by Zipes, the changing function of the fairy tale. So you can access it there. Just have a look through all of the content under all the units for additional reading, because it is there, but also please make use of your English 1A reader, which is very usefully printed out articles or chapters that are useful to you. So in the English 1A reader, you've got this article called How Fairy Tales Educate and Civilize Us, Ethical Literary Criticism on Fairy Tales. So it's in your English 1A reader, do read it, definitely. And all of this reading that I'm asking you to do is to assist you with the upcoming assignment. And I think it's always just a good idea to have more information than simply primary text. So right now I'm going to go through assignment 2, or at least the version I have, but I can't imagine that the version that will be made available to you will be any different. And once again, please do a logger ticket with VC Assist if you can't find this assignment anyway, and let me know what they say as well. Keep me posted. Okay, so it's for 100 marks. It says you should spend about 10 hours on this. So I think in some of our preparation today, that can certainly count towards the 10 hours that you're expected to spend on this. So you've got the referencing rubric that you probably get for every assignment you submit. But just to give you a very brief overview, if you've got poor referencing, you could lose between 5 and 10%. If you don't reference, if you don't have an in-text reference or a reference list, if one of those is missing, then unfortunately that counts as plagiarism. So I'll have to send your work on to someone else who deals with plagiarism. So just make sure that you try. So have in-text references and have a reference list at the end. Remember, we use the Harvard method of referencing, which I've spoken about. So have a look at the IIE's referencing guide for Harvard, and also my slides that I shared previously on the Harvard method. So this assignment follows or focuses on Learning Unit 2, which was Renaissance and Romantic Poetry, and then Learning Unit 3, which is Fairy Tales. So you've only got to respond to one. So select either question 1 or question 2. Do not answer both questions. If you answer both questions, I'm just going to mark the first one. So rather don't answer both. For ease of marking, ensure that you clearly indicate your selected question on your assignment submission. So please indicate question 1 or question 2 so that I know, because each question has a slightly different rubric. And the rubrics are available at the end of this document. And bear in mind your word count. So like I said to you in class, I'm not too bothered about word counts personally, but if it goes on for way too long, I might stop reading. So I go by pages, so I know that it's about 300 words a page. So if you're asked to submit 1,400 words, I divide that by 300, and I can't do that in my head very quickly right now. So that's 3, 6, 9, 12. 15. So that's about 5-ish pages. Okay, so if you have 5 pages, that's okay. If you have more than 5, I would maybe start worrying. And then the bottom question says, please make sure you reference all sources accurately in text and in a reference list. So that's just really bringing home the point that I always mention now, that for each in-text reference you've got to have an elongated version of that reference in your reference list and vice versa. Okay, so question 1, which is on Renaissance and Romantic poetry. You've got to write an essay of between 1,000 and 1,400 words in which you compare and contrast the treatment of the universal theme of love in Renaissance and Romantic poetry using any one of your prescribed Renaissance poems and any one of your prescribed Romantic poems as evidence. Okay, so a comparison. You're taking a Renaissance poem and a Romantic poem, and the specific theme you're looking at is love, the universal theme of love, and you're comparing the two in the poems. The argument you provide in your essay has to be structured, so make sure it answers these questions. In what ways are language, tone, and imagery used to represent love in each poem, and to what effect? In what ways are the socio-historical similarities and differences between the Renaissance and Romantic eras evident in each respective poem's attitudes towards love, and to what effect? So specific things you have to look at: language, again, the choice of language and words, the tone of the poem. So is it bitter? Is it reverential? Images that are conjured as you read or alluded to, and then consider the socio-historical similarities, so the times that they were living in. So you can go back into our lecture notes there, you can have a look at VC Learn, where we spoke about the differences, or we spoke about the times that people were living in. So what caused the Renaissance and the Romantic era? What sort of people were proponents of those eras? What did they do? And so on. And how is that evident in the attitudes of the poems you choose? And then at the bottom, importantly, it says, to support your argument, refer to relevant lines, imagery, language, themes, and other relevant poetic devices from your 2 chosen poems, as well as relevant arguments and theory from at least 3 additional credible sources. So you've got to refer to the poems, so they will count as 2 references. And then in addition to those, 3 other sources, and they have to be credible sources. So that means ideally journal articles. So use the journal articles you have at your disposal in your English 1A reader. Make use of the readings that are available on VC Learn. Any of those kind of readings that are given to you by the institution can be considered as accredited. Like I said, be wary of sites like SparkNotes and things like that. Don't use them as sources. They are not credible sources. So I want to hear your voice coming through again. So your voice first, and then use other people's arguments, so those 3 additional credible sources, to back up your points. So your points come first, and then you back them up with other people's points. That's for question 1. Then question 2 has 2 parts. So if you are going to answer question 2, you have to do both question 2.1 and 2.2. So based on your knowledge of the fairy tale genre, write an original short fairy tale of 500 to 700 words. Okay, so that's quite fun. That's for 45 marks. And it says, please note, the subject matter of this fairy tale is up to you. You may write about whatever you like as long as it captures the essence of the fairy tale genre. So it's common themes, imagery, and didactic tendencies or moral lessons. So read through those fairy tales that are required for this learning unit. Make sure you get the gist of them. See if you can identify common themes, you know, maybe use some of props, morphology, and then write your own fairy tale. The style and structure of the fairy tale is also up to you. Use the prescribed fairy tales from Learning Unit 3 as inspiration, but ensure that your fairy tale is unique and that it is consistent in its style and structure. Marks will be awarded both for creativity and for using appropriate subject matter, style, and structure to enhance your fairy tale's effect on the reader. See the relevant rubrics in Appendix A for further details. Then question 2.2, you've got to write an essay about your fairy tale, 500 to 700 words for 55 marks, in which you critically reflect on the creative, thematic, and stylistic choices you made in the creation of your fairy tale. Please note, you need to explain how and why your fairy tale was directly influenced by at least one of the prescribed fairy tales in Learning Unit 3, and the effect this had on your choice of subject matter, style, structure, moral lesson, themes, and imagery. So you've got to show you know at least one of those fairy tales quite intimately in order to use it as inspiration for your own fairy tale that you come up with. You must make reference to at least 2 additional credible sources to support critical reflection. So again, make use of the sources you have available to you already. Check the English 1A reader, check the readings on VC Learn as well, and use those to back up your points in your essay. Marks will be awarded both for your essay writing skills and for how well you are able to think critically about your fairy tale writing process and choices. So just because you're writing about yourself doesn't mean that you only refer to you and your knowledge. You use other people's theories and arguments to back up your arguments in this case. Okay, so that's question 2. Then the rubrics. I encourage you to look at these more closely. So question 1 and question 2 are both for 100 marks each. And it's usually divided with level of engagement with the prescribed reading or poems, and then the level of engagement with additional credible sources, and then your argumentation. And then obviously the structure, presentation, and quality as well is important. And you lose marks if your referencing is not on point. And then for question 2, we're looking at the appropriateness of the fairy tale subject matter, the appropriateness of the fairy tale style and structure, creativity, you get marks for being creative, and your level of engagement with the prescribed fairy tales and additional sources. So remember, you've got to show that you know at least one of those fairy tales pretty intimately, and you're also able to refer to other sources to back up your points. Your critical reflection, your essay structure, presentation, and quality. And that's it for question 2. So remember, you are picking one of those questions, either question 1 or question 2. If you pick question 2, there are 2 parts to it. Okay, so you could write a fairy tale and an essay, or you can just write an essay for question 1. Okay, so that is assignment 2, as far as I know. Please do keep looking for it on the portal. Maybe you'll find it there. And please, please, please log a ticket with VC Assist if you aren't able to access it. And keep me in the loop. Let me know what they tell you, because I also think it's very important that you get access to this. I will make these recordings available to you as well, so that you can go through this again if you need to, but I'm hopeful that you will get access to that assignment 2 document soon. Do you have any questions?